Hi, Malka, Dvora, Entin. So excited to be with you this afternoon. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. I'm a clinical consultant with Yesh Tikva, therapist who focuses on all issues relating to perinatal or parental mental health, things like infertility and pregnancy loss, and all things relating to postpartum. So I was so excited that you were willing to talk with us as a part of our Yesh Tikva's Tikva Talks to bring some important conversation to the community around all things relating to infertility. So Malka, could you introduce yourself to our viewers and tell us a little bit about who you are?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. Big fan of Yesh Tikva and everything that you're doing, Gila.
Yes.
So I am an adoptive mother of two young children living in Crown Heights. The way I describe myself is I struggled with infertility for, the first 6 years of our marriage. And through that process ended up in the world of adoption. So I try to bring awareness to it and talk about it within my community. So I'm really grateful and excited to be here.
Great. We're so glad that you are. So I wanted to start by knowing that there's so many different things I would love to talk to you about and ask you about, but I would like you to start with what it was like for you. What do you remember, let's say, just from an emotional perspective, an emotional place of what it was like going through infertility? What are your memories of those years?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that even now stays with me, those feelings that I can kind of conjure up. It was a lot of loneliness. I live in Crown Heights. I have a lot of friends and family here. So being surrounded by people that, had children, were pregnant, it was kind of the natural cadence of life. And for me, that wasn't the case. So there was a lot of, obviously, the pain of constant failure. There was the shame and the guilt that I felt, which I knew I shouldn't feel, but I still struggled with. So when I hear people talk about that, I can absolutely relate to that. There was the loneliness, and there was a lot of the how I felt toward God. There was a lot of anger, a lot of feeling like, why do I not deserve this? I see my peers, a lot of comparison. A lot of comparing myself to my peers and saying, she does this and this, you shouldn't do this, but she does this and this, and she has this, but I'm trying to do this, and I deserve more, and why aren't I getting it? And I would do a lot of fantasizing, and I think about this especially now during Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur time, especially as I would daven, and I would imagine what the next year would bring, and then I'd come back to that time of year and I never got that. So that was very painful. Even now, remembering that's actually deeply painful. So.
Yeah, and I think that you're noting that even as an adoptive parent, those feelings are like right there beneath the surface. Those things don't get left in the past at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm wondering could we talk about what it was like for you to transition from that world of actively pursuing fertility treatment to making the decision? First of all, did you need to make the decision to stop treatment in order to pursue adoption? I know there's different rules in different agencies. What was that kind of transition of space for you from fertility care to fertility treatment to pursuing adoption?
Yeah. So I started this process very young, we got married at a very young age, kind of naturally expected to get pregnant. Didn't even think about, do I want to get pregnant? I just was going to. It was something that was going to happen to me. And then that didn't happen. So I slowly started, in the world of infertility. We were in that world so we were married for 6 years. I would say the first couple of years, we didn't really do anything. But I would say 4 or 5 years, we started off, with basic treatments, and then we moved into IVF. And we did several IVF treatments. And we even moved doctors, and the last doctor we had, I'd been in a place which was bigger. It was more of a factory feel, and they do great work and they help so many people. But and they were so confident that they were going to help me. I was 22, I think, when I started. So I was going to be great for their numbers. But it wasn't the right place for me because I had exceptional or unexplained issues. I needed more care and attention. So I moved clinics, and I started off, I remember I bought a package of 2 because it was cheaper. And I thought this time will definitely work. Or I allowed myself to believe again that it might work. And the doctor was really on our side, and then it didn't work. And when that happened, you know, I'm used to that. I became accustomed to that call that I would get at work from the nurses, which, you know, when they would tell you that it didn't work. And this time he called me himself, the doctor, and I could tell that he was even surprised, like he thought it was going to work, and it didn't. And I left my office and I went to Whole Foods. There was a Whole Foods nearby with a cafe, and I sat there, and I just remember, I think of an anvil on my chest, that type of feeling. I couldn't breathe, and I couldn't believe, like, again, this is happening again. I can't do this anymore. So I, right there on Yelp, found myself a therapist right then and there. And I went from there to her office. And when I told her this, she said to me, well, what if you never did it again? Because I kept saying, like, I need to do this again, I need to do this again. And that was the first time that I thought, wow, maybe I don't need to do this again. Maybe I don't need to do fertility treatments again. And so she mentioned to me, would you ever adopt? Something like that. And people had said that to me over the years, but it was always like, in someone's sister-in-law asked, would you ever adopt? So obviously I hated those girls, and some of those I've forgiven now, but even now I still have some resentment for them. But that was the first time I thought about it. And I remember leaving, and I was walking toward the subway, and I called my husband and I said, would you ever adopt? And he's so relieved. And he even said to me, I brought it up to you before, which obviously I don't remember because I wasn't in a place to hear that. So that was a shift for us. And, you know, for us, there was definitely a moment where we closed the door of fertility treatment because we did our best. We really tried. And I was able to accept, I'm not failing anyone. I'm not failing my in-laws. I'm not failing my family or my community by saying, you know, if God wants, you know, us to have a biological child, he can do that. But we were going to place our efforts elsewhere in order to build a family. And it was the first time in so long that we felt that a family was possible. It's like, I don't know, I guess when people decide to, you know, build a family, they think those things. I just hadn't felt that in so long.
Was it something that you felt like you needed to close that infertility treatment door in order to move forward with adoption? Was it something like it was this and then that? Was there any consideration for them being done at the same time?
So a lot of agencies don't want you to do it simultaneously. But for me also, and maybe there are some that are fine with it, but for me, yes, it was closing the door because adoption is different than having a biological child. And the more I've been in this world, my children, you know, are very close in age. So they're 3.5 and 3. They're in the 3s. So the longer I'm a parent, I think it's just not the same. You know, if I were pregnant, I wouldn't smoke. I wouldn't, you know, take drugs. I mean, there are a lot of realities that take place when you enter the world of adoption. And I think to be in the right place to start to engage with them, you have to be like, oh yeah, okay, this isn't surrogacy. This isn't my pregnancy. This is something different. So the more that you're able to grapple with that and become comfortable with that, the more I think you can embrace adoption for what it is. You know, I'm a parent, I have children, and I love my children. I would never replace my life journey for anything. But I'm also not a biological parent, and that's the truth. And it's important to recognize that for me as much as for them.
Do you feel like that was something that you, in order for you to proceed toward adoption, that was something that you needed to grieve and come to terms with? Can you talk to me a little bit about what that was like?
So I can't point to one moment where I say, oh, I grieved, but I found out in July, I remember it was like right after the 4th of July, that we found out that our last treatment had failed. And then pretty quickly I started to consider adoption. So maybe I would say that, I don't know, that last year of treatment, I guess, was in some way my grieving process. I don't know, I can't point to, or even now, there are moments where I'll say to myself, where I get jealous of someone, not necessarily because of pregnancy, just personality wise, but more when people point out similarities between fathers and children, or mothers and children, looks, or so I noticed that twinge of jealousy within myself. So I don't know, maybe I still have moments of grief like that. But it's not, so I can't point to a moment, but it definitely surely happened over the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm. And what was that like for you then what was the actual process like when you'd said, okay, it's time for us to look into adoption? How did you even begin?
Yeah, so this is a short interview today. So this is a whole nother topic. But so for me, I'm very lucky. I knew about Chavi Brook, who's the Chabad shlucha. Her and her husband are in Montana. I'm part of the Chabad community, so I called her, and she always says to me, you were one of those people that called and said, I'm adopting. Here are my questions. She's like, a lot of us, we do a lot of these calls. Those of us who have adopted, we do calls within our community of people like considering adoption. So it's always refreshing when it's like, this is what I'm going to do. And so she was a resource to me. And then I just started scouring the internet. I thought about international adoption. It's very difficult today. There are various reasons why. So I looked at different domestic adoption agencies, and I chose ours. I just thought it was the most comfortable and a fit for a Orthodox family. I just liked the social workers. And so that's how I ended up choosing them. It was really a lot of work on my own. So now when people call me, I try to always first send them resources, things I've written, so that they can start with that. But yeah, it was pretty opaque, and I had to figure out my own way, because I think a lot of people think of it as, oh, someone called me and it was a miracle, which happened with my second child, which is crazy, but that's not necessarily a strategy for building your family.
Right. And actually, was it something, a lot of people that I have spoken with when talk about adoption, they say that it is important for them that they only adopt a Jewish child. Is that something that, can you address that, not specific to your own children, but in the general, that concept of like, this is the only way that would work for me? And how do you navigate that as a prospective parent?
Yeah, I obviously started thinking that way. And I realized that just not the landscape of adoption. So I get a lot of messages about, I'm interested in adopting a newborn Jewish baby. And the first thing I always reply to them is, that's great. By the way, you should just know there aren't really any newborn Jewish babies to adopt. I'm sure there are many reasons for that. So, there are special needs children, and there's a man who runs, Stephen Krause, I think is his name, who runs the Jewish Children's Adoption Network, placing special needs babies. They're an amazing family who have done a lot of work to help special needs children. So there is that, but it's not what people necessarily are looking for when they ask me. So, halachically, it goes both ways, and you could speak to rabbis who would point you in either direction. It's a mental hurdle for people, definitely. For me personally, both my children were not born Jewish, and I don't even feel strange saying that, because I think that should be the default assumption when entering adoption. If you'd like to adopt a newborn, you're probably not going to be able to adopt a Jewish newborn. Where am I going with this? I don't know. Help me out here.
You're doing great. And what about today? Like, when you talk about your children to community, talk to me about like some of the challenges that you've had to face, or some of the opportunities that you've used. It's clear you've become a bit of an advocate, or more than a bit of an advocate in this arena. But what is the conversation with community like about how do you explain Or do you feel the need to explain, or how do you talk about children that are brought into your family by adoption?
Yeah, so those are great questions. So first of all, I mean, I don't talk about, especially right when my children were born or in the first year, I was much more active about it. I wrote about it in the Neshei Chabad newsletter, because this was actually also thanks to that therapist, because I had this thing in my head, like everyone's saying this and everyone's saying that. So she said, you know what, put forth a narrative, put forth your narrative that's true, that you want people to learn from. So that's what I did. I think my children are both biracial, and I live in Crown Heights, which is, has a history of, racial tension within the community. So it can be a bit of a hurdle at times. I think, thank God, over the last years, our community has come such a long way in terms of language surrounding inclusion, and questions that I even got 3 years ago are just different today. And I think parents and mothers are very conscious of raising their children to understand that, a person is worthy because they're created in the image of God, regardless of what they look like, Jewish or non-Jewish. And I'm very hopeful about that. But that's not to say that that's not a challenge, and that doesn't come up at times. So that's one thing that comes up. I think it's, again, as we mentioned, it's the Jewish piece. Adopting non-Jewish children who are born not Jewish, non-Jewish, is a mental hurdle for people. But I mean, the way I think about it, and my brother and I were recently talking about it, he said, these children, I live in a community where people have large families, and they feel compelled to have large families, and they think it's important and good because each of those souls was meant to be in their home and in their life. And my brother said something to me like, so these children were meant to be, these are the souls that were meant to be in your family and to be in our community. So they came a little bit of a different way, but those are the souls that you were meant to nourish. So I don't know, that's the way I think about it. Yes, my children weren't born Jewish, but I see them now, especially now, they're experiencing all of Yiddishkeit for the first time, and there are no words to express how much it feels right.
Do you talk to your children about adoption? Do they know that they are adopted?
So they're little, but the agency taught me that from a young age, you get comfortable with talking about it, mostly when they're very little, just because for you. So I say it all the time, especially I'll just say, you were adopted, and your birth mama gave birth to you, and I say their birth mother's name, especially at this age when they'll say, I was in your belly. I'm like, no, you were in my belly. You were in your birth mother's belly. Just to talk about it. And I say, Mama and Papa, even on Rosh Hashanah, we were taking a walk, and it was the first day. So, I'd tried to look a little bit at the Haftorah. I love that Haftorah of Hannah. So I said something to my son, who's the one who walks with me and talks. My daughter's wild, so she's always running. So I told him that, Mom and Papa waited for you. And then one day Hashem made a miracle and you came into our life. And I don't guess I'm very emotional about this now, but yeah, so I don't, that's not to say that I don't think that there are challenges, and that there will be special challenges as they grow older, and there's a grieving process that they're going to have to go to, because this isn't what was meant to be. What was meant to be was they were supposed to be with their natural family, but that's not what happened. And there is a brokenness. It comes from tragedy, and it's important to recognize that, and to know that as they get older, it's not all going to be that miracle story, even though that miracle story will remain true. But there will be other, moments that we'll have to reckon with.
And that there's also this parallel narrative that I love how honest and open you are about that parallel narrative as well, because, just wrapping it up in a pretty bow isn't their story. And
right.
And how honest that is in terms of going into it, knowing exactly what the potentials are of the things that you'll be facing as an adoptive parent, and for children who are adopted. And yet I think that when you talk about preparation and having conversations around these things from very early ages, you relieve the secrecy, relieve the shame, the guilt, the whatever, all these crazy things and stigma that we all layer. Somehow we internalize all those things when there's no reason for us to have any of those things. But how incredible it is that you're able to see to the future in that way as well. I just so respect what you just said. My mind is still taking it all in, and I appreciate that. And the last few minutes that we have together, I wanted to ask you, what were some of the messages that you would like to tell the community? What are some of the things that you want them to understand, either about your family, or you being the adopted parent family with adopted children, or even just more broadly about adoption in general?
So for the community, I would say by each of us kind of changing our language or being more mindful of how we talk about adoption, how we talk about race, that it doesn't just help me and my children, but it also helps the prospective families that might pursue this, who are afraid to, who don't want to stick out, who, that communal effort will help all of us. That's one thing. I wanted to write something down when you mentioned at the beginning that we would talk about lessons for the future. I don't know. I mean, I would say for someone thinking about this, starting this journey, don't think of this. You might start off thinking of this, oh, this is plan B, but this is not my plan B at all. It's layered with, of course, to be a tragedy, and it's layered with complexity. But it's as an adoptive parent, I get to, I don't know, I just experienced this gift, and I was exposed to a world that I never would have known about, and challenges that I would have never known about otherwise. And I have immense love and respect for my children's birth mothers. And I don't obviously share anything private about them, but just think about what they did. Think about what they did for their children, and how many of us could say that we would be willing to do the same thing. So I remember the day that I left, that, when we were at the hospital and one of my children's birth mothers left, I was in shambles, because I've never experienced something so deeply tragic as watching someone give you their child. And I remember crying that night on the phone to my father, and he said to me, like, at some point, you also have to remember, you were entrusted now, and now now do what she wants. Now, like, okay, you can cry. He's Russian, so he didn't say you can cry. But now step up and do what it is that you were meant to do. So I don't know how this helps a potential adoptive parent, but you just become so much stronger through this process. I become more empathetic, so much less judgmental. I just didn't know how much I could grow before this, And then as time goes on, you realize what your normal is, what your boundaries are, what because you're raising your children, and that's what matters, and that's your duty. So I hope that's helpful.
It's beautiful. And so can you just tell me how awesome your children are? Tell us who they are. Tell us about them.
So my son, who's older, he's just sweet and kind and curious and loves animals and just a nachas. Like, he's my soul. And then my daughter, who's second, 7 months younger, my son didn't really cry. Then my daughter was, also remember that's the other thing, like, as beautiful and amazing as it was, like, I cried a lot with the second child, because they're 7 months apart, and she cried a lot. But she's wild and crazy and, like, jumps off of things and just makes me be nicer, because she's so nice outside and bubbly, and they're great. And the thing I mentioned about parallels, I see that my family I think some of it is people want to draw the parallels, you know, between she's so like this family member, and you know what? Some of it is true. Like my parents will say, "Oh, about my daughter. She's so like you. You were so wild," and there's truth in that. And that's okay. It's not, you know, it's not genetic, but there is some truth in that. But yeah, my husband and I, that's the other thing. My husband was my complete partner in this, more open than me at times, pushing me to be more open. And actually, in adoption, when I get the calls, I often find husbands are very important because they could be make it or break it in being open about this. And I've seen a lot of times where husbands are more anxious about it, worried that they won't have a connection to a child that's not biologically theirs. And I mean, my husband, he just, they're his kids, there's no question. So
it's amazing. I love it. I love hearing about them and hearing about your family. I want to thank you for taking the time to do this with us. I have so much more to think about, so many 100,000 more questions to ask you, and I just appreciate your openness, your honesty. I know that these are the kinds of conversations that when we begin to have more of these conversations in public, we have a greater chance of people finding their families and creating the families that they want and dream about. And thank you for being willing to do this with us today. Thank you so much. And for everybody else who's watching, feel free to reach out to Yesh Tikva for ongoing events, Tikva Talks, support groups. We're here for you and continue to have amazing resources that are accessible nationally. Take care. Have a wonderful day, everyone.